Next guest is watching this all very, very closely. He holds more than 1 million BofA shares. He's Jonathan Finger, Managing Director of Finger Interest. And John, good to have you back on the program.
Good morning. Nice to be back. Okay,
so as you just heard from our contributor, Bill Cohen, he sees this as a positive step for Bank of America. Your take?
Well, it may be positive for Bank of America. I think it's a negative for shareholders. We were surprised by the size of this transaction in terms of how much new capital the company is going to raise to pay back the TARP funds. So we think it's very dilutive to shareholders and was not necessary.
Yeah, I want to tackle that issue because there's some analysts, including Paul Miller, saying that this is actually good news on the I mean, of course, you never want to be diluted, but there was a lot of concern that BofA was going to have to actually raise all $45 billion in the public markets and therefore dilute the shareholders even more. So the fact that it's $20 billion is a lot less than what some had expected.
You know, the highest number I saw out there was about $14 billion that people expected the company might have to raise. But it certainly helps them.
Paul Miller says $45 billion, so I think there's a lot of range there.
Right, but the company had plenty of liquidity, and from a capital standpoint, the company was pretty well capitalized. You know, their loan loss provisions were a little bit light, but this is a company that's got pre-provision earnings power of sort of 12 to 15 billion a quarter. So they would have been able to build substantial capital internally without diluting shareholders.
Okay. Go ahead.
Now, I was going to say, if you look at the number of common shares that are going to be issued here, it's roughly 1.2 billion shares. I mean, to acquire all of Merrill Lynch, they issued 1.3 billion shares. So this is a very large number of shares on a relative basis.
Okay, but setting aside this dilution issue, Jonathan, I mean, apparently there was a lot of trouble for Bank of America, for the board members, to be able to get anybody to take the job to replace Ken Lewis. They needed, in some ways, to get the government out of the bank and be able to then recruit the best candidate. I mean, do you buy that argument that is also, I mean, that is partly the reason why, dilution or not, that is the reason why they had to do this?
I buy that argument a little bit. I think this will certainly facilitate the recruitment of a new CEO. At the same time, my understanding was it was really the last $20 billion that they took with relation to the Merrill deal that put them into the category of extraordinary, support from the government. And if they repaid the $20 billion, that would allow them to have not been under the auspices of the pay czar and would have, allowed them to pay a new incoming CEO whatever they wanted to. So I question why the whole $45 billion now, and why do it in such a way that is this dilutive.
But I mean, you've had credit concerns. You're concerned about credit and the credit quality at Bank of America. So maybe raising that money, all $45 billion right now, gives the bank some capital cushion, though.
It clearly does that, but this is significant dilution, and I really think part of the reasoning behind doing this was to be able to give Ken Lewis a positive note to go out on.
Okay.
And I'm not sure it's good for shareholders.
Okay, Jonathan, then the last thing I want to ask you about, because certainly, we've been looking at not only internal but external candidates of Bank of America. You would imagine that it'd be a lot more difficult to recruit an external candidate if you're not going to pay that person a whole lot of money. Maybe it'd be easier to pay less money to an internal candidate. I don't know. But would you be more upset, given that they're paying back this $45 billion, would you be more upset if they still went with an internal candidate and not an external one?
That would clearly bring into question why repay the TARP if you're not going to go outside the company. Okay. Yeah, we would certainly be disappointed.
Okay, all right. And I know you have advocated for that, John. All right, good to have you with us and to talk about this on a very timely issue. Jonathan Finger, he's a managing director of Finger Interest, and I'm sure we'll have him back on again to talk more about BofA.